Hey friends, it's Tomer, and in this video I'm going to show you all the latest card upgrades that I made to my personal commander decks. Most of these upgrades are from the latest set, Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but there are also some Doctor Who and also Commander Master cards here as well. So we kick things off with my Dragon deck. This is not a dragon deck per se, it's rather a Changeling deck. So the idea of this deck is actually to focus on Changelings, which are all creature types at all times, and then run all the type of kindred payoff cards. So I have like Knight Exemplar to give everything indestructible, draw cards off my werewolves, off Tovalar, blow up any permanent with Reaper King, all that good stuff. This is my signature deck, the deck that I'm most known for, and I haven't updated it in apparently 11 months. I also have a new goal with this deck where I want every single non-land card to either be a Changeling or care about a creature type. It adds an extra layer of restriction to the deck building process, but also makes it a lot more fun because I have to be more creative on my deck building slots. So the first card I'm going to be adding in is Curious Altasar. This is a fantastic card for go wide dinosaur decks, and this Changeling deck does go wide. It's going to draw a lot of cards very efficiently, and it's a really decent body itself. It's a 2/5 Vigilance Reach, so it's a decent blocker. And I'm going to be taking out one of the best cards in the deck, unfortunately. It's Stinging Study. This draws me 9 cards for 5 mana because my Dragon commander is 9 mana. You lose 9 life as well too. That's the only downside on it. You can't really use it when you're low on life already. But instant speed, draw 9 for 5 mana is almost unbeatable, but it no longer fits my restriction of having every single non-land card care about creature types. So it's gotta go. The next card I'm adding in is Roaming Throne. I think at this point, if you have a creature kindred deck, you already know about Roaming Throne. It fits in basically every single creature type deck and just doubles the value out of basically all of them. It just doubles the amount of triggers you get, and doubling the triggers you get just means so much extra value. It even comes with Ward 2, so it's even harder to deal with, and it counts as whatever creature type it is. Usually I'm going to be naming it as human or dragon or whatever my board state currently is most about, but it's always going to be very good. And I'm going to be taking out Bring to Light for it. This is a generic, really powerful tutor. In a 5-color deck, you get to basically tutor up a 5-drop and immediately cast it for 5 mana, which is absurdly efficient, but like I said, it doesn't really fit the new restriction where every single non-land card has to care about a creature type. This is just generic, more good stuffy, so I'm taking it out. The next card I'm adding, I'm not actually convinced is good, but it's too sweet for me not to at least try it. This is Throne of the Grim Captain. For 2 mana, you get to start milling, but if you craft it with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire for 4 additional mana, you get a giant 7/7 menace trample lifelink hexproof that whenever it attacks, it makes your opponent sacrifice things, and then you also get to get an exiled card that you crafted with it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. That's a ton of value, but my only concern about this card is it's very slow. You have to craft at sorcery speed, and then the Grim Captain itself doesn't have haste. There are a few ways for me to give it haste in this deck, which makes it a lot better, but paying 6 mana to have basically a 7/7 on the battlefield that doesn't do anything and gives your opponent a full turn cycle to deal with it isn't ideal, but I mean, it's just so sweet and it fits so perfectly in Changelings. I gotta give it at least a try. And the card I'm taking out for it is actually really good, so I'm really curious if it's going to stick around outside of the deck. This is Battle of Frost and Fire. The main chapter is basically what I use it for. For 5 mana, I basically deal 4 damage to each non-giant creature and each planeswalker, and since most of my board are Changelings, they're all giants, it's almost an asymmetrical board wipe. The other 2 chapters are somewhat relevant, but not too relevant. It's mostly just pay 5 mana, wipe the board of your opponent's smallish creatures, which is already very good. So Battle of Frost and Fire, I'm going to keep it on the sideboard for now, but I might sneak it back in if Grim Captain isn't doing as well as I hoped it would. The next card I'm adding in is actually from Commander Masters. This is Titan of Lityara. It's a 6 mana 6/6. It enters the battlefield. It chooses a creature type, so it fulfills my criteria, and it is the chosen type, and then it just draws a whole bunch of cards when it enters the battlefield or attacks. So it's fantastic in a Changeling deck, and it's always going to be whatever the most important creature type on the battlefield is at the moment. It's usually going to be either humans or dragons, and I'm taking out Seagate Lore Master for it. It's just a bit too slow. It's 5 mana, and then it doesn't draw any cards until you either give it haste or you wait a full turn cycle. It's just a bit too slow, and I'd much rather have for 6 mana Titan Yara, which ETB draws cards, and then if you do get to attack with it, it does even better than that, and it counts as whatever the most important creature type on the battlefield is at the moment. Seagate Lore Master, though, I'm putting on the side because I also have a tap-untap version of this deck, and that's going to be a lot more powerful because if I have ways of untapping Seagate Lore Master, then it gets way better than even the Titan. The next card I'm adding is from Doctor Who. This is Gallifrey Council Chamber. It's a legendary land, ETB, Surveil 1, taps 1 colorless, or it taps to add 1 mana of any color, but you can only spend it on Time Lords or alien spells or activate abilities of Time Lords or aliens. And all my Changelings are Time Lords and aliens, so that works very well. However, I mean, it's only like 23 of my cards are Changelings, so the other cards, non-land cards, are going to have to be cast for the colorless ability. So it's a little bit awkward. I can't fill up too much on these cards, but I am taking out Windswept Heath for it, and the main reason why is I'm actually taking out like the 2 remaining fetch lands in this deck because I just don't like shuffling. So it's just a laziness factor, honestly. I took out all the fetch lands. Well, 2 are remaining now, and Windswept Heath is now the second last one to go, and I have 1 remaining at this point. Then we have another Doctor Who card. This is the Dalek Emperor. It's a 7 mana 6/6, but it costs 1 less to cast for each Dalek you control. So I can cast it, if I have 5 Changelings on the battlefield, I can cast it for just 2 mana, a black and a red, which is really good. It gives all my Changeling haste. And then at the beginning of combat, each opponent faces a villainous choice. They either sacrifice a creature, or I get to make a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with menace and also haste. So that's actually pretty darn good value. Obviously, if your opponents have something valuable, they're just going to give you a Dalek. If they have like a 1/1 and they don't want to give you a Dalek, then they'll just sacrifice the 1/1. It's all good, but it's just good value either way, and especially if you're casting it for 2 mana, that's just great value. And due to my new restriction, one of the best cards in the deck has to go. This is Hellkite Courser. This is a 6 mana dragon, but it costs 1 less because of the Dragon, so only 5 mana. And basically what this does is it puts a 6/5 flyer on the battlefield, and then it puts the Dragon onto the battlefield, lets me smash in with the Dragon for 10 damage in the air, and then also draw cards, put a permanent directly from my hand onto the battlefield afterwards, and then you return the Dragon back to your hand after that. Just being like turn 5, play the Dragon, smash somebody for 10, draw some cards, put a permanent onto the battlefield, so even mana advantage at that point too, is just unbeatable value, but it doesn't focus on creature types, so it doesn't match my new criteria, so I'm taking it out, at least for now. If I end up not focusing entirely on my new criteria, then I'll bring it back in because it legit is like one of the most fun cards in the deck, but I want to try out other new cards like the Dalek Emperor anyway, and this is a great excuse for me to experiment a little bit more. Next, we have a card that I've been waiting a very, very long time to add to my deck. It's Greymon Avacyn Stalwart. This is the in-universe reprint of Rick from The Walking Dead, a card that is just fantastic in Changelings because for 4 mana, it gives all your humans, with my Changelings, +2/+2, and then I get to also choose 2 abilities, First Strike, Vigilance, or Lifelink. I'm usually going to be choosing Vigilance and Lifelink, or Lifelink and First Strike. I don't know, whatever, any of these 2 abilities are going to be fantastic. My deck is very much a go-wide aggro combat deck, and Greymon really fulfills that role very well, and it also is desperately lacking Lifelink in the deck, and this deck can lose a lot of life very quickly, so having some sort of Lifelink and Anthem effect tied to it is just really, really good. And the card I'm taking out for it is Curse of Opulence. This card is a house in all my decks, basically, that have red. Anything that attacks is just going to love it. For 1 mana, it's just like a rampant growth ++ for you, and also directs potential attacks away from you because people want the gold instead. However, it doesn't care about creature types, and you know what? I have it in enough decks already, so I'm okay just taking it out of this one. The deck is not hurting for ramp, so yeah, this is an easy swap for me. The next deck that got a lot of value from Lost Caverns of Ixalan especially is my Brutical Brutaclad Techlore Engineer deck. This is an artifact deck that cares specifically about tokens, and the reason why I picked Brutaclad is actually because not only is this just like an Izzet artifact token deck, it's focused specifically to abuse Mechtitan core. So the entire idea of this entire deck is to get Mechtitan core onto the battlefield, get a bunch of artifact tokens onto the battlefield as well, get Myra box on the battlefield so the legend rule doesn't apply, and then play Brutaclad, turn all of my tokens into Mechtitans, and smash in for a glorious win. It is very ambitious. It doesn't often do the thing very well. However, the backup plan is whatever huge token I have on the battlefield, Brutaclad will turn all my tokens into that, and then I can win that way too. So if Mechtitan core doesn't do it, then I can still win just by smashing face a million other ways. So Lost Caverns of Ixalan got a lot of sweet artifacts that flip that are very, very good for Brutaclad. The first one is the Everflowing Well. For 3 mana, you get an artifact that just draws you 2 cards and mills you 2. It's not great. However, this deck is very easily adding a lot of cards into our graveyard. It has a lot of like self-mill and fetch lands and everything like that that allow us to almost immediately flip the Everflowing Will into a legendary artifact land, taps for mana, and then it could also turn things into copies of other permanents I control until end of turn. It's just great value. Once you have the front side and the back side in consideration, and the fact that it's an artifact, and my deck is very heavy on artifact synergies, the Everflowing Well becomes very good in this deck. And I'm going to be taking out the reality chip for it. I always found this card just a little bit too slow. Like, yes, it's an artifact. Yes, it generates card advantage, but it's just kind of slow. And also, I'm trying to lean more towards non-creature spells rather than creatures, just because I have a lot of really efficient token makers that require you to cast non-creature spells in order to make those tokens. So I'm trying to cut back on artifact creatures and put more artifact non-creature spells instead. The next card is like the best pickup for Brutaclad in the entire year, honestly. It's Dowsing Device. For 2 mana, whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield, target creature you control has +1/+1 and haste until end of turn. I'm an artifact token deck, so whenever I'm making a bunch of artifact creature tokens, they're all going to get haste and can immediately attack, and that's freaking awesome, and they deal extra damage. And then when I have 4 or more artifacts, which is very easy to do in this deck, it immediately flips into a land that can tap for mana immediately, and then it can also act as kind of like a win condition by itself with its activated ability. 3 mana, target creature gets haste and +X/+O, where X is the number of artifacts you control, activate only as a sorcery. I have a lot of just like Thopter tokens, like 1/1 flyer artifacts that I make all the time. So you could just have like 20 or so artifacts on the battlefield very easily, and then you could just smack somebody for 20 in the air and just kill them. So yeah, Dowsing Device for 2 mana is absurdly good in this deck, like just a powerhouse. And I'm going to be taking out a very weak card that just hasn't really been doing that much for me. Urza's Command. It's not an artifact, so that's 1 strike against it. It does a couple things, the most notable one being making a construct. It makes a huge artifact creature token, which is great, and then I could turn all my tokens into constructs with Brutaclad, so that's like an alternate win condition if my Mechtitan core doesn't work out. But I've just found this card kind of underwhelming for 4 mana, and also it just doesn't benefit from other artifact synergies in the deck, so it's a pretty easy cut here. The next card that's very exciting is Brass's Tunnel Grinder. There's another flip artifact. You can see there's a theme here that basically just allows you to super cycle. When it enters the battlefield, you discard any number of cards and you draw that many +1. So you get rid of the cards you don't need, put them into your graveyard, so fills up the send and whatnot. And then you get to draw cards you actually do need. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you get to put a board counter on it, and if you descend it 3 times, it manages to flip over to a very powerful land. Again, it's a sweet land, taps for mana, and whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by it, you get to discover X, where X is the spell's mana value, so it gets you a ton of value. So this is pretty slow to flip. You have to kind of wait 3 turns in this deck to do it. But when it does flip, it's super powerful. And then the front side just good too. Like, it just does things that I really want to be doing. And I'm going to be taking out the Ready Scrap Savant for it. This card is basically what Brass's Tunnel Grinder is doing 9 times out of 10, where I'm just looting away. Sometimes, though, Duretti does allow me to sacrifice an artifact I don't need to get back something I do need from the graveyard directly onto the battlefield, and that's great. But it's not an artifact, and I just think Brass's Tunnel Grinder is just overall going to be a lot better in this deck. And then the final addition to the deck is not a flip card. It's actually just the Indomitable, the best coastal piracy effect ever printed, in my opinion, and it's an artifact, so it's even better in Brutaclad. 4 mana, 6/6 vehicle, trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. You can crew for just 3, and you can cast it from your graveyard as long as you control 3 or more tapped pirates and or vehicles. I cannot meet that criteria at all, but it doesn't matter. It's just a nice payoff for my go wide token deck to draw tons of cards. It's an artifact itself, and I could even crew it to smash face for even more damage. Like, that's just freaking amazing. And we're taking out like just a terrible card. Saheeli's Directive. I always wanted this card to be good. I tried so hard. It looks and reads like it's supposed to be the artifact version of Genesis Wave, but it's so much worse because it doesn't hit lands. Like, it could hit artifact lands, but there's not that many of those, and it's just always been disappointing. I've cast this for like X equals 10, and I've always just been really just sad times, so I'm finally cutting it. As cute of a card it looks like, Indomitable is just going to be way better. So we move on to my second most iconic deck, I would say. This is my Boros equipment deck led by Akiri Fearless Voyager. It's all about just playing a bunch of creatures and equipping them and smashing face. And it has a hidden sub-theme, which is not really hidden at all. This is just, we're trying to assemble Kaldra and win with Kaldra. Helm of Kaldra, Shield of Kaldra, Sword of Kaldra. Try to smash face with that, equip a bunch of stuff onto the Kaldra token, and try to kill people with that. And the best combo being try to equip World Slayer onto Kaldra, blowing up everything else but Kaldra, and just winning the game off that. So the big upgrade that I'm super excited about is Thousand Moon Smithy. I think this card is absolutely nuts. For 4 mana, you get a Gnome Struct, which is like a Karnstruct, but even better. It counts all the artifacts and or creatures you control. So this is going to be like just a casual 8/8 in like any deck, and even bigger in a go wide deck. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, transform Thousand Moon Smithy. It's a land, it taps for white, but whenever you cast a spell that's an artifact or a creature with it, you make another Gnome Struct. So you're just going to be flooding the board with these insanely huge artifact creature tokens and just smash face with that. And all my equipments give evasion essentially, so it's going to be really easy to close out games with my Gnome Structs. And the nice thing about this is my equipments don't care if they're tapped or not. So I can tap all my swords or whatever to flip Thousand Moon Smithy, then immediately cast spells with it and just have a grand old time. And the card I'm taking out for it is Cosmic Intervention. I actually do love this card, but I love it specifically in like aristocrat strategies where you're sacrificing a whole bunch of stuff, fetch lanes included, and then getting them all back with Cosmic Intervention. And it also doubles as board protection, because if somebody tries to wrap the board and you have this ready, you can get everything immediately back onto the battlefield, and that's awesome. In this deck, though, I have so many sources of mass board protection that are better than Cosmic Intervention that I just don't need it. And also, this is not a sacrifice deck, so I can't really utilize Cosmic Intervention in the way that I was really hoping to use it. So I'm cutting it, and I'm keeping like the 4 other mass protection that I have already on the battlefield. The next card I'm adding is Diamond Pickaxe. It's really simple. It's just a red equipment, costs 1 mana, and equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever it attacks, you create a treasure token. So it's nice incremental mana generation on a card, and it has a lot of equipment synergy. Obviously, like with Akira, you could draw a card with it when the equipped creature attacks as well. So that's all good. And the card I'm taking out for it is Loyal Warhound. This is a great card. However, I find it to be a little bit clunky in this deck because this deck has so much land ramp. So I'm often not being able to utilize my catch-up ramp cards like Loyal Warhound just because I'm ramping so much with like my Deep Gnome Terramancer, my Sword of the Animist. I think there's 2 other equipment that are ramping out lands as well too. So it's just getting less consistent than I would like. So I'd rather replace this inconsistent ramp card with a more consistent thematic ramp card instead. The next deck that got a lot of upgrades over the past months is my 6-drop deck. So the conceit of this deck is that every single non-land card in my deck has to have a mana value of exactly 6. Not 6 or greater, not mostly 6, but some exceptions. No. every single non-land card exactly mana value 6. So the leaders of this deck are the commander, Tassiker the Golden Fang, and I have a companion, Gyruda Doom of Depths, because it's 6 mana, and obviously, since all my cards are 6 mana, I meet the companion restriction as well. So the deck is really sweet and really unique. The main conceit of this deck is that there are a lot of ways to ramp before turn 6, so I can start casting my 6 drops earlier than turn 6. And then there's also a lot of 6 drops that can be cast for less than 6 mana if I'm meeting certain requirements. So I have like adventure spells like Emerald Dragon that can be cast a little bit cheaper, or undaunted cards like Curtain's Call. All these things allow me to cast spells before turn 6 and utilize my mana more efficiently. So the deck got a lot of upgrades over the past couple months. One easy upgrade was upgrading one of my land cyclers. The deck has a lot of creature land cyclers, not just to make sure that I keep hitting my land drops until turn 6, but also they get reanimated by mass reanimation later on. So Rampaging Spiketail is just a 5/6 with better stats, better everything than Jesse and zombies. So I'm replacing the zombies with the Spiketail, very easy. But the most exciting thing is that I get to upgrade my board wipes. The deck runs only 4 or so board wipes, but they're really useful in terms of catching up to the board state because the deck is inherently much slower than the rest of the table. So by turn 6 or so, I slap down a board wipe, reset the board, and that lets me catch up. So the first one that I'm really excited about is Fairy Slumber Party. It returns all creatures to their owner's hands. I'm going to have maybe one thing bounced, whereas your opponents are going to lose a lot of stuff. And then I get to make a bunch of fairy tokens for each opponent who returned a creature this way, up to 6 if I have 3 opponents each returning a creature back to their hand. So that's just freaking awesome. And I'm taking out Feast of Succession, which is good, but it doesn't kill everything, so it's not super consistent. Monarchy is nice as well too, but I just think the Slumber Party is just way better. And then we have another fairy-ish board wipe. This is Tegwill's Scouring for 6 mana. I destroy all creatures, and then I get to make 3 fairy rogue creature tokens with flying, which is just great. You could also cast it with Flash, but it's going to be very difficult to do so. I just kind of ignore that text. And I'm taking out Extinguish All Hope, which is just a bad board wipe. It doesn't even kill enchantment creatures if my opponents have any of those. So it was just a placeholder. I was just waiting for better board wipes to be printed. And then the last card is a board wipe that's getting replaced, Life's Finale, for a really sweet sorcery. This is a Great Intelligence Plane. This is from Doctor Who. You draw 3 cards, then target opponent faces a villain's choice. They discard 3 cards, or you may cast a spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. So odds are you're going to just choose somebody who has not a lot of cards in hand, 3 or more, but not 20 or something. And they're not going to discard those cards, right? Those cards are precious to them. And then they're just going to let you cast a 6-drop for free. So you're always going to cast something that costs 6 mana. So draw 3, cast a 6-drop for 6 mana. It's just good value. It's just very, very powerful. I'm taking out Life's Finale. It's a board wipe, which are important in this deck, but it was just a really bad board wipe, so out it goes. Then we have another creature that we're upgrading. This is Auton Soldier. It enters the battlefield as a clone, and it also gets around the legendary rule because if it copies a legendary creature, it's not legendary, so you can have both on the battlefield. It's also an artifact and has Myriad, so if it gets attacked, you get even more value. Clones are particularly good with my companion Gyruda, because if I hit one of these clones with Gyruda's Mill and Reanimation ability, then I can make the clone a copy of Gyruda and do it all over again and have multiple Gyrudas on the battlefield. So that's awesome. In general, it's just a good card though. And I'm taking out Frost Titan. Frost Titan, old school, still a good card even 2023. It's just not good enough when I'm getting better and better options these days. And then we have another Land Cycler. Again, these cards are really, really good to make sure that I keep hitting my land drops. And then later on, they're just big beasties that you can reanimate or just hard cast or whatever, and it's all good. Lunar Hatchling comes from the Doctor Who set, 6/6 Flying Trampler. Basic land cycles, and then it has Escape. So you can, if you have a lot of mana in the late game and you have extra lands that you don't need anymore, you can just exile land, escape, and put a 6/6 on the battlefield, which is nice. And we're taking out Nemesis of Mortals, which is kind of cute in the deck. Again, I have a lot of land cyclers, I have a lot of creatures that put themselves into the graveyard, so I could usually cast Nemesis of Mortals for 4 mana or as little as 2 mana even, but just even a 2 mana 5/5 is just kind of meh, because I have to do it after turn 6, right? It's not something you can play on turn 2 or whatever in this deck. And then yeah, you can become a 10/10 later on as well too, but I don't know, just a little bit too slow. It doesn't really do anything on the earlier turns, so I decided to cut it. Alright, we move on to my mono black control deck with Toshiro Umezawa. So this is mono black control with a twist, and the twist is that it's spell slingers, specifically instant spells. So we're just going to be killing our opponent's creatures and then using Toshiro's ability to essentially flash back instants from our graveyard and recast them. So all the instants in our deck basically have flashback, so we get to cast all of them twice for double the value, which is insane card advantage. So the deck has a lot of board control with cards like Liliana's Triumph and Sheoldred's Edict, which not only deals with our opponent's creatures, but also triggers Toshiro very, very mana efficiently, allowing us to cast a lot of extra spells from the graveyard. And then we win the game with like a Torment of Hailfire, or even more spicy is like Thrilling Encore. If we kill all our opponent's creatures on one turn, and then we can just get them all reanimated back on our side of the battlefield, that's super fun. So there's one easy upgrade from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. This is Bitter Triumph. It's an Infernal Grasp that can hit a Planeswalker instead of just creatures, but you have to pay 3 life instead of 2. And the increase of life loss is just not that relevant in Commander when you start at 40. And you also, if you have just a lot of cards in hand, and Toshiro does draw a lot of cards, you can like discard an excess swamp or whatever to Bitter Triumph and not lose that life if that's relevant to you. So just being able to hit Planeswalkers, while not super relevant or anything, is really nice if you come across like a Super Friends deck or something. Toshiro's abilities don't really work very well against Planeswalkers, and most of my spells kill creatures, not Planeswalkers, so I really like the added flexibility here. The other card I'm very excited to add into the deck is from Eldraine. It's Throne of Eldraine. It's a 5-mana colorless legendary artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, choose a color. You can tap it to add 4 mana of the chosen color, spend this mana only to cast monocolored spells of that color, and you can also pay 3 and tap it to draw 2 cards, spend only mana of the chosen color to activate this ability. So this is a nice top-end ramp card for monocolor decks, but it also has that extra flexibility, being able to draw cards if you have a lot of mana and you have nothing to spend it on. So I like the flexibility here, and also this deck is very, very mana hungry, so having a 5-drop that taps for 4 immediately is just really, really good. And then if I am mana flooded and I need some action, I can start tapping it to draw cards instead. That's just really good. So what I'm taking out for it is Hellish Rebuke. This is like the cutesiest card in the entire deck, where you can pay 3 mana at instant speed, and then if a permanent deals damage to you, they have to sacrifice it and they lose 2 life, which is really, really cute. I once killed a Perforos God enchantment with this, which is very, very funny. It's a type of card that it's not really good because it's not going to save you from dying. It's going to be like spiteful on the way out. And you do have to get smashed in the face for it to do anything first, usually. But I do like throwing it back into the deck every once in a while just to put the fear in my play group that I might have Hellish Rebuke. It makes them think twice about attacking me. So some games, yeah, it's in there. Some games, it's not. It's not a good card, but it does have psychological warfare applications to it. The next deck I'm upgrading is Zedruu the Great-Hearted. This is the very first Commander deck I ever got way back in 2011, so over a decade ago. I got it with the Political Puppets Precon, and I've been upgrading it and tweaking it and keeping it in my paper collection ever since. It's a donate deck, so we're going to be just giving our opponents really cool permanents to hold on to for us while we draw cards and gain life in the process. And some of them, most of them rather, are benevolent, or benign rather. We're going to be giving them like a Howling Mine or whatever that doesn't do anything bad to them, it just sits around. Or we could give them nice things too, like Hithlane Rope and stuff like that, where it actually benefits them and we draw cards and gain life in the process too. But we also have some mean stuff like Illusion of Grandeur, which makes them lose 20 life when we bounce it away from their battlefield. Maybe give it back to them again so they die. Or like super mean cards like Pyromancer's Swath, where they have to discard their entire hand. So, you know, the Zedruu giveth and the Zedruu taketh away. So in terms of upgrades for the deck, we have one card that I thought is very interesting from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. This is Unstable Glyph Bridge. This is a 5-mana artifact where it enters the battlefield. If you cast it, for each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls, then destroy all creatures except creatures chosen this way. This is a nice little board wipe in our deck because it makes sure that Zedruu doesn't die because it's 2 power or less, so we could just choose our own Zedruu. And we also give our opponents like small creatures, a lot of small creatures like tokens or whatever. So we could choose that for our opponents to hold on to and then wipe the board if there are other creatures. So it's basically a true board wipe for us that keeps Zedruu alive and keeps our donate targets alive as well too, which is very, very cute. And then when we transform it, when we craft with it, which is also very easy to do, it's just another 5 mana and any artifact we have laying around, we have Sand Swirl Wanderglyph. It's a 5/3 golem with flying, so it's kind of vulnerable to dying, but it has a really powerful ability. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can't attack you or planeswalkers you control this turn, and each opponent who attacked you or a planeswalker you control this turn can cast spells. So basically what this says is, as long as this Wanderglyph is on the battlefield, unless our opponent really wants to kill us, then yeah, they can. But otherwise, they want to cast spells, right? So they're just not going to be poking us. We just don't take poke damage, and I guess if our opponent really wants to kill us, then either they have to kill the Wanderglyph first, or they have to commit to actually just swinging a full lethal army at us, and then they're able to cast spells afterwards. But this card is just a great way to buy time and keep our life total high as well. And the card I'm taking out for it is Sun Titan. I've had Sun Titan in there since, I want to say 2011. I want to say it was literally 2011, like the first card I put in there. It's still really good, but it just doesn't have enough synergy in my deck anymore to justify it being there. Like, it's still fine. There's a little bit of blink synergy in Zedruu, so you can get extra triggers off Sun Titan, but there's like no ways of giving it haste, and there's no way of giving it evasion. So it just, I don't know. It's good. It's always been good. It will forever be good, but I feel like they're just better cards that I'm finally putting it on the side. And the next card I'm adding is a really old card, but just something I haven't gotten around to adding for like a decade. It's Crown of Doom, and the entire reason why is a mistranslation on my part. So it's a 3-mana colorless artifact. It says whenever a creature attacks you or planeswalker control, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and you can pay 2 mana, and target player other than Crown of Doom's owner gains control of it. Activate this ability only during your turn. So basically, if you're holding onto the crown, you're going to take a lot of extra damage, and you don't want to hold on to the crown, so you have to give it away to somebody else, and they play Hot Potato. But what I always thought about this card was that they can just give it back to you, and that's like not what you want to do as Zedruu. You want your opponents to hold on to your permanents and not give them back to you. I never read that it was like other than the target's owner, and that makes it 10 times better because now you can give it away, and now your opponents can give it back and forth to each other, but who cares? They're going to do Hot Potato with it, you're going to gain life and draw cards. So that's awesome. And I'm actually taking out Talisman and Conviction. It's a good mana rock. It still is a good mana rock. I just have like 15 or so ramp sources in Zedruu at this point. It's just too much. So I'm just cutting like the least synergistic, the weakest of the bunch, and Talisman of Conviction is the weakest right now. The last deck that I am upgrading today is Myra the Magnificent. This is an Izzet Spellslinger Artifact Attraction deck. Attractions, a lot of people poo-poo with, and they don't want anything to do with it because Infinity bad, yada yada yada. But I will say this is the most requested deck my opponent asked me to play. If I'm at a play group, if I'm sitting down with friends or sitting down with strangers, and I showed them what decks I have, people pick Myra 9 times out of 10. So all you Infinity haters, keep note, people do like Myra a lot. So what Myra does, in a nutshell, for people who don't know her, you cast instants or sorceries from your hand, and Myra will trigger and open up an attraction. And attractions are basically just artifact tokens. They start outside of your deck, and then when they leave the battlefield from any reason, they just go into a super exile zone. They leave the game, essentially. And you can imprint instants or sorceries from your graveyard onto these attractions, and whenever your attractions trigger, you get to cast those spells for free. So it's really good in terms of connecting instants and sorceries with artifact synergy. So my deck is full of cheap instants and sorceries that you can cast to trigger Myra as efficiently as possible. I also have instants and sorceries that cost 0 mana to imprint from the graveyard, like Inevitable Betrayal. And then I have a lot of cards that just give you a huge benefit to having a bunch of artifacts laying around, like Galzef Prismari. You can tap your attractions, which are artifacts, to cast more and more spells. Same thing with like Stormkiln Artist. You cast instant sorceries, now you have a bunch of artifacts. So Spellslinger, artifacts meshed together with a cutesy, open a theme park variety to it. So in terms of upgrades, the big one is Akko First Among Equals. This is from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's a 3-mana blue 1/5, and it says at the beginning of each player's end step, if an artifact enters the battlefield under your control this turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So Myra makes an artifact, an attraction, every single time you cast an instant or sorcery. So we have a whole bunch of very cheap cantrippy instance that we can cast on anybody's turn, like Opt or whatever, and that's going to trigger Akko, and we're going to get to look at the top 2 and take the best card from among them into our hand, and the other one goes into our graveyard. That's just great value with Myra. So on our turn, we're going to be drawing an extra card with Akko, and then whenever we're opting or whatever on opponent's turns, then we also get to also draw extra cards of Akko, which is just great. And it's a 1/5, so it's a decent blocker. And we're going to be taking out Mystic Confluence. This is a great card. It's a nice top end to the deck, but I just found that I just needed a tighter, like a lower end curve to Myra. Like Myra is just like so mana hungry and she's so slow, but like Mystic Confluence, while just a great card, very flexible, just too slow. It's just another 5-drop, and I just had too much top end, and I need to cut down on it. And those are all the major upgrades that I made over the past few months. Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Doctor Who, Commander Masters. I think those are all of the ones that I upgraded from. And then, oh yeah, I got Crown of Doom from 2014. So those are all my upgrades and my thought process behind them. Let me know if this sort of video is interesting to you all. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with some top 10s to wrap up 2023. What are the top 10 commanders from 2023? What is the top 10 pre-cons from 2023? I have all that and so much more coming up right soon. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss it. And until next time, friends, see ya!